Good morning, everyone. As part of our reading focus, where we are all about celebrating the love of reading, we also know that the more you read, the wider vocabulary you get, the more words you've got to be able to use in your writing. And an example of writing in our community is the Country Times. Can you see the background? That's a newspaper room from World War II. Now, we have a fabulous guest here today. His name is Nick Perry, and he's the editor of the Country Times. So he's going to answer all of the questions that you might have about writing and editing and our newspaper. I'm going to hand over.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me at your school. As was said, I'm the editor of the Country Times, and I've been working there and writing the newspaper, or helping to write it, for over 12 years. So I spend all day long reading and writing, and it's not a bad job. So definitely a very important skill for everyone to practice, and happy to come and chat to you all about it. So are we taking questions, or what do we do?
You want to have questions? They've got questions prepared.
All right, who's got questions prepared?
I will start with Miss Martin's class. Can you please unmute yourself, Miss Martin?
Question. Where and how do you get the content for articles?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. So we have a few people who work at the paper called journalists, and I'm one of them. And it's our job to come up with all the ideas for articles. And it can be hard sometimes to think of enough ideas to fill up the whole newspaper, because any given paper, we probably have 70 odd stories. So it's quite a lot. We get some ideas from places like the school, for instance. Any of your teachers or the principal or whoever are very welcome to send us ideas and let us know what's happening at the school. And we can either talk to them and do an article, or we could come and visit the school and say g'day to everyone and take photos and do the stories that way. So quite a few of our articles come from people in the community letting us know about things. The other way is that all of our journalists have what we call rounds, and that means that you've got a few specific areas that you become a bit of an expert in. So you might be an expert about the police, for instance. So I don't write as much anymore, but I used to do the police round, and part of that is you get to become work friends with lots of police officers, so they might give you the information you need, like if there's a car crash, or if someone has done the wrong thing, then you can ring up your friends at the police and say, what happened here? And they'll tell you. And really the best way that we get our articles is just by being out and about in the community and looking around and seeing what's happening and talking to lots of people. And then you get lots and lots of ideas, because there's always lots of stuff happening around the place if you have your eyes open and have a look.
All right, Cheyenne.
What's it like being an editor?
Being an editor is a pretty good job. So I'm a journalist, which means I write stories for the newspaper. And when you're the editor, it basically means you're the boss of the journalists. So you don't have as much time to write stories, but you do lots of reading. And every story that the journalists write, sometimes I give them the story ideas, or sometimes they come up with ideas and I say, yep, that's a good one, or maybe not that one. And then I read all their stories, and then I choose what goes on the front page and what goes on all the other pages and try to make it all look pretty, and basically make the newspaper right up to the point where it's printed. And then I read the whole thing again. So when the paper comes out, I've read basically the entire thing twice. So I don't really need to look at it again after that. But it's lots of organising the journalists, lots of dealing with emails, lots of people email stuff. And I do a few stories still as well, which is always fun. You get to interview people and take some photos and write stories for everyone to enjoy.
Okay, last question.
How long does it take you to do one article?
It depends, of course, on what kind of an article. And it depends on the journalist. Some take a bit longer than others, which is not a bad thing. Because I've been doing it for a long time, I can sometimes write an article pretty fast. But if it's if the school sends us a little story that they'd like, I could probably do that up in maybe 10 minutes and it would be ready to go in the paper then we would just proofread it and make sure it's all right later. Some stories can take a long time to do. For instance, I did one a while back that took 2 months of research, and then I probably wrote it. It might have taken 4 or 5 hours to write it over a few different days before I was happy with it. So it's a very big difference between 2 months and for a big article and 10 minutes for a small one. And then there are times as well when you go somewhere and you might be at a meeting or something for 3 hours, or maybe the police are doing something, or there's an emergency, like something's on fire, and you might have to stay there all day long before you can write the article, because until then you don't have enough information. So that can take a whole day as well. But once I actually sit down to write it, I try to do it pretty quickly, because I've had enough practice now that I can generally write something within half hour or an hour.
Cool, thank you very much. I think we'll head over to Miss V's class. Miss V, you just need to unmute your class.
Stand up. No, this one.
Hey, mate.
How much newspapers have you read?
Just come a bit closer to the microphone, mate.
I couldn't quite catch that, sorry, love.
Right, keep going, keep going. Close, 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 close.
How much newspapers have you read?
How many?
How many,
Quite catch that, sorry.
how many newspapers have you written?
How many newspapers have I written? Well, the Country Times has been around for a long time, so there have been a lot more than what just I have written. But we do 51 newspapers per year, and I've been there for a bit over 12 years. So it must be about 600 and something newspapers that I've been a part of. But I don't write the whole thing. We have a team of us who write it, so I only write part of that. Most of our journalists have to write maybe a dozen articles every week. So imagine if school was just English class and you had to do 12 assignments every week. That's kind of what we ask for our journalists to do. But overall, the paper's been going a lot longer than that. It's actually been going for 155 years. So the photo in the background that you can see, the principal's put up, that's of an old newsroom. And our paper was going back those days and a lot longer before that as well. So it started basically right when all the mining started in Kadina, Wallaroo and Moota. And I couldn't tell you how many papers there have been in that time. But yeah, probably about 600 that I've been involved with and counting. So if you times that by writing 12 articles a week, that's a lot of stories that I've had to write for my job so far. That's 6,000, I guess 7,000 odd times I've had to write stories. But luckily every story is a bit different, so it's still fun. Another question?
How much time do you spend reading a day?
I spend lots of time reading every day. Reading is very important in general, but it's especially important if you're a newspaper editor. because you have to not only write everything and read the journalist's stories, but you have to be good at reading so that you understand exactly what it is that the story is about, and so that you can make sure that when the story goes in the newspaper, everybody who reads it is able to understand what the news is, because it's important for everyone to know what's happening in their community. So I get to work and I read emails. I read through other things that people give me at work. I read through all the journalists' stories. I read through lots of reports and things like that so that I can write some stories about those. And as I said before, then when I've read all that, then we check the whole paper before it gets printed to try to stop any mistakes in there. And I read the whole thing again. So lots and lots and lots of reading. And so it's very important that we do lots of reading for practice for most jobs, as well as it's important that when we're reading, we learn how to speak and write in a way that people can really understand easily. So when we write for the newspaper, we don't try to use lots of big words and make ourselves sound really smart. We actually say that all our stories should be able to be read and understood by a primary school student, because lots of people aren't that good at reading and reading comprehension. So we need to make sure that the newspaper is accessible so everybody is able to read it and understand it and know what's happening in the community. And part of that means I have to do lots of reading to ensure that the final product is nice and easy and understandable for your parents and everyone else to read.
Why did you want to start becoming an editor?
Thank you. That's a good question. Well, at school, I used to really like English class. And so I thought I should do something to do with writing. And I know that recently you spoke to Tricia Strenger, who's a wonderful local writer. And it would be a very fun job, I think, to write books as well. But this was an opportunity for me to stay living locally and be able to write for a living, which is something I enjoy doing and something that I've always I wasn't that great at maths or science or those things back at school. I tried hard, but I was always better at English, and I liked English and PE. So I thought maybe I could just be a sports reporter and write about sport, but which I do that, but unfortunately at the Country Times, you have to write about everything, not just sport. So, so I get to write about all sorts, but that's why I thought I should become a journalist. And then once I got into it, I found it really, really fun, because you get to go around and talk to lots of people, and we take our own photos. So that's pretty fun. And I like going around having a chat, which you've probably already worked out. I can do that as well. It's another skill. So talking and writing made that a good job choice for me.
Thank you, Miss B's class. Miss Hicks, can you please have your students?
Do you like writing
Writing.
for the newspaper?
I do like writing for the newspaper. Thank you for that question. Yeah, it doesn't get too repetitive because the news always changes. So even though I do the same thing a lot and I sit at my computer and I write, and I sit on the phone and talk to people and write down what they're saying, they always have different information. So that's always nice and makes it still exciting sometimes. And sometimes I might know some big news that's going to happen that no one else knows yet. So that's kind of cool. And like I said before, I like to take the photos as well. Most of our journalists take our own photos, and that's pretty fun because sure you get hold of your mum's phone sometimes or iPad and take some photos. So I get paid to do that as well, which is nice. So yeah, I do like it.
Do lots of people help you write at the newspaper?
I just didn't
What
catch the very
are
start.
their jobs?
There we are. Can I just have that question one more time, please?
All right. Say, do lots of people? Do lots of people? Can you hear?
I can hear okay.
Okay.
I'll try my best.
I'll try again. Okay, ready?
Just not so close with the microphone to your mouth.
Yeah, it was a bit distorted.
Oh, there.
Do
Lots of people
lots of people
help write
help write at the newspaper? What are their jobs?
That's a good question, thank you. We do have quite a few people who write at the newspaper. So, and I'm the boss of them, and which is cool. I reckon there are about 6 of us who write the stories. Let me think. We have 3 journalists plus me, plus I have a sub-editor who helps with odd jobs, plus we have a junior reporter who's just started, who just last year was at high school, and so we're getting him, we're kind of throwing him in the deep end, to be honest, but we'll see what happens there. So there are 6 people who write for the newspaper, and I'd like it if there were more, because that would be a little bit easier, and we did have 7 or 8 up until a couple of years ago, but we've had a couple of people leave, and we're hoping to replace them soon as the coronavirus stops and we actually make some money again. And apart from that, there are lots of other jobs at the newspaper as well. So we have 2 people at the front desk who take turns working there, and we have 3 people in the accounting department, and they're our good friends because they pay us. It's payday today, in fact, and they pay all our bills, and they make sure that everyone pays their bills to us as well. We have 3 more in what we call our sales team, and they sell the adverts that are in the paper. So I'm sure you would have seen some ads, or maybe your parents might have a business that puts ads in the paper, and that's the main way that our newspaper makes money. So every time we sell a paper, the paper costs $2, and we probably get $1 or $1.50 of that. But if you want to put in a full page ad, then we might get like $2,000. So that's the big way that we make all of our money. And of course, at the moment with coronavirus, not as many people can afford to put the ads in. So that's why we're on JobKeeper. So there's 3 people who just sell ads. So they're the ones who keep us all employed by making the money. We have our big boss called Michael Ellis, whose family has had the paper for 3 generations now. And his kids have actually worked there as well. So that's 4 generations. And then we have people who work in graphic design as well. So once we finish taking the photos and writing the stories, there are people who use really massive, cool computers to make the paper look pretty. And so they might choose where your photos go in the paper, if you've ever had a photo in there, and we try to make them all as big as possible. And then those people also organise our website. And they also, on Tuesdays, go out next door and print the newspaper, where we have our big printing press. So overall, I think we have about 20 or just over 20 people who work at the Country Times, and 6 of them write the paper. So it's a lot bigger than just us journalists. Yeah.
Ms.
Who's
Hicks,
next?
you have one more.
Sorry, yes, we only came up with 2, so we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Miss
All
Donald,
the best.
Do you sit at the same table as the sub-editor?
That's a good question. Every newspaper is a bit different. In our newspaper, all the journalists sit in one little area, and then I've got my own office, as if I think I'm real fancy. And the sub-editor actually sits behind me, Has anyone been to the Country Times office before for a tour? There we are. A few people think they have. The sub-editor sits behind me and we have a window that we keep open, so she's very close, so we can talk a lot. So at a lot of newspapers, the sub-editor is like your English teacher, and they go through and make sure that all the stories are written really well and there's no spelling mistakes. Our sub-editor does a little bit of that, but mainly I do that myself, and our sub-editor does lots of things like if the school or if a community organisation sends in a story, then they handle lots of those things that free up time for myself and the journalist to do a bit more hard-hitting news. And they also do a lot of the sport stuff. So probably not your standard sub-editor, but we do work together a lot to make sure that the paper's full up. And the sub-editor works 3 days a week. And she's the best at proofreading the newspaper before it goes out. So she picks up lots of little mistakes and stops us from looking silly. And we have an open plan office as well, I should say. So everyone else there are little walls between them, but the walls don't go all the way up to the roof. So they can all talk to each other very easily. And that's quite handy as well. So we all know what each other are up to. So we don't have two journalists both trying to write the same story or anything like that.
Okay, now Keisha.
What tips do you use
For editing.
for editing? We have a editing bookmark that we use.
Hold it up.
Oh, let's see. What does it say?
Can you guys read out what does C stand for?
Capitals.
And what does H stand for?
Handwriting.
And I is ID. So your name. And M stands for?
Make sense.
And P?
Punctuation.
And S?
Spelling.
That is very good. I don't have rules written down, but they are very important. And I do have a big dictionary that I check quite often to see. So whatever we write in the paper matches up with the dictionary. Because yes, it's very important that we get our spelling and punctuation right. And that's part of what I was saying before. We need the paper and the articles to be very easy for people to read. And it's not easy to read if you spell things wrong or if you have the wrong punctuation, then it gets very confusing to read. So I definitely follow all those rules. I don't have them written down, but I do follow those rules. And I also follow one other very important rule that the boss says, which is don't write anything that's going to get us sued.
Okay, our last question is Izzy.
Nick, tell me why we should buy the Country Times instead of any other newspaper.
That's a great question. Obviously, because the Country Times is the best newspaper, but I'm biased in saying that. So what I can say objectively, 100% sure, is that the Country Times is the only newspaper with all of the local news in it. So you could buy the Advertiser, but it's really not going to have a lot of news about York Peninsula specifically. And in fact, there is no website or TV news or anywhere else or radio that just covers specifically York Peninsula. So if you watch Southern Cross News, they do a good job. Maybe once or twice a week, they might have a story about York Peninsula, which are generally copied from something that we've already written. And whereas if you buy the Country Times, then you've got however many pages, 50 odd pages of news that is all 100% local, specific to York Peninsula. So we don't really care about all those other areas when we do our job. We want the local community to know what's going on. And so that's our focus, is local, local, local. And so if you want to keep up with everything that's happening in the York Peninsula and be the first to know what's going on, the Country Times is really your only choice. And the other thing would be that some people decide they can get their news from social media or Facebook now, but that is not news. A lot of the stuff you read on there has not been written or researched by professionals, and you can get a lot of porcupines off of social media. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's not a good way to get your news specifically. If you want news that is definitely true and accurate and professional, then we're really the only way that you can get the Country Times. So that's why you should buy it.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Miss Lucon.
Oh, there we go. All right, April, you want to ask your question?
What is your favourite part of making a newspaper?
That's a good question. Like I said, I've always liked writing. So my favorite part is when I get to write a good or interesting story. I'm very obsessed with sport. So like if I get to write about sport for a week, or music, or things that I really like, that's pretty cool. And another cool thing is sometimes I get to interview people who are a little bit famous. So that's always all right.
That's cool.
Lots of AFL players and some actors and some musicians. Not sure about people who you guys would know specifically, but even a couple of people from like ABC Kids channel, and probably the most memorable one, which I won't tell you a single story about, but I interviewed the late Chopper Read, who's a very famous person in Australia, and he's a big scary man. He was a big scary man, and he's pretty famous, and that was an interesting interview. And afterwards I just thought, I really hope that he likes my story. So that's a cool thing too, when you get to meet famous people sometimes.
Why do you only use 4 colours to print the newspaper?
Only use 4 colours. That's a great question. The reason is because using those 4 colours, you can make almost any colour come out in the newspaper. So the newspaper, we try to print it so it looks really good, but if it ever doesn't, that's the printer's fault, not mine. And they should be able to make all the colours we need using just 4. And the 4 colours are, they have fancy names, but they're cyan, yellow, magenta, and one more that starts with K that I can't think of right now. But it's basically a pinky red, a yellow, a blue, and the other one that, as I said, I can't remember. And you can make all the colours that you need to just out of those. But yes, it's pretty clever. And if you ever come to the paper and watch how we print it, or have a little tour, you'll learn that all the pictures you see are actually tiny dots. So you can look under a microscope and it's not all colour, it's actually little tiny dots that are so close together you can't really see them. And so by the time you combine all those 4 colours into thousands and thousands of tiny dots, too small for the human eye to tell the gap between, that's how we can get lots of nice colours using only four actual colours when we print.
What is the difference between the Country Times and the advertiser?
That's a good question, because we even get adults who don't really know that, and they wonder if we also do the advertiser or vice versa. So the advertiser is a newspaper that's based in Adelaide, and they do news for the whole South Australia. The Country Times is based in Kadina, and we only do news for Yorke Peninsula. So we are owned by different people. We have a whole different group of staff, just like 2 completely different businesses. A bit like if you go to Kadina and you have Gunnings that sell Toyotas and Rosewarnes that sell Holden. Similar thing, but yeah, whole different teams and different businesses. And so we don't hang out with the advertiser people or anything like that, but they do a very good product as well. But what you'll notice when you read the advertiser is it's lots of stuff about Adelaide. And every now and then there's a little bit of there might be a few stories about Yorke Peninsula. Whereas with us, every story is either directly about Yorke Peninsula or it's something that I think the residents of Yorke Peninsula should really know about. And so that's the differences. And the Advertiser's quite a bit bigger setup than the Country Times. Because the Advertiser comes out every day and we only come out once a week, the Advertiser have a lot more staff and a lot bigger process to get their paper out every day. So I've never actually been to the Advertiser building. I should go there for a look one day. But yeah, we just have the 20 odd people who put out our newspaper just for everyone on Yorke Peninsula.
I think that's it. Thank you very much for all that, Nick. We will. I want all the teachers to actually unmute so the kids can say thank you to you as well. So can all the teachers please unmute? And on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much. It's lovely chatting to you, and thank you for the wonderful questions.
So I'm sure that we're all looking forward to maybe coming down and having a little walk through. I've seen that most of the upper primaries had their hands up, but all the others haven't had a visit through the Country Times before. So when this is all over, hopefully we could come down and have a visit.
We'd love to have you along when it's safe and corona free to do so.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good
Right.
seeing everyone.